Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to Farm Street. Welcome to this inaugural Justice and Peace Westminster lecture. Justice and Peace in the Diocese of Westminster promotes peace and justice through raising awareness, advocacy, and campaigning throughout the parishes, schools, and chaplaincies of the Diocese of Westminster. I'm wearing two hats this evening as the chair of the Justice and Peace Commission and also as parish priest here. So I want to say also a very warm welcome as parish priest on behalf of Farm Street, parish of the Diocese of Westminster and also the Jesuit parish in central London. As we are a gathering which is brought together by the Church, I'd like to begin by inviting us to pray, a short prayer which is the collect in the Roman Missal for the Mass for the preservation of peace and justice. Perhaps let us stand for that. O God, who have revealed that peacemakers are to be called your children, grant, we pray, that we may work without ceasing to establish that justice which alone ensures true and lasting peace. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God for ever and ever. Amen. We can be seated now, please. I'd now like to invite briefly Colette Joyce, my colleague and the Justice and Peace Coordinator for the Diocese of Westminster, to say just a little about the work of Justice and Peace in the Diocese, and then we'll introduce Baroness Scotland, our speaker this evening.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in front of you. My name is Colette. I am the Justice and Peace Coordinator for the Diocese, a job I've been doing for just coming up 5 years now. And in that time, I've come to deeply love and cherish these two words, peace and justice, at the heart of so much of our Christian life. And our mandate from the Cardinal has always been to put those two great virtues at the heart of our diocesan life. We do that in some very practical ways. I produce a monthly e-bulletin which goes out to all the parishes and to a mailing list of interested people. And that is a summary of all the different events that come under this heading around the diocese on a vast array of subjects, and also flagging up the events of a large number of charities. We work particularly closely with our colleagues in Caritas and in CAFOD, looking at justice at home and justice abroad. We have a number of special interest groups. At the moment, we have a network looking at the environment, which we run across 8 dioceses that meets once a month. And we also run a roundtable, which has been meeting since February, to discuss the diocesan response to the situation in Gaza and the horrendous conflict going on out there. We're also now looking at assisted dying and how the people of the diocese respond to the legislation currently before Parliament. So it's a very varied and interesting role and of great significance. We also are always looking for more volunteers in parishes to connect us to the life that's going on in your community. One of the reasons I love this great word peace is because it is the first words of Christ when the community gathered as we are gathered tonight. When he had a large group of his disciples in the upper room, the first thing he said to them after the resurrection was, "Peace be with you." This is what our Lord wants for us above all things, our peace. Peace in our hearts, peace in our world. And it's why we've chosen peace as our theme for tonight. And many of you have heard me tell this story, but I'd only been a few weeks in the job when Bruce Kent rang me up, noted peacemaker of the diocese, God rest his soul. And he said to me on the phone, this rather awed that he'd taken time out to call me, and he said, "Whatever you do, Colette, don't forget about peace. And in the face of responding to much injustice and always thinking about what we can do on that practical level, those words have stayed in my head and in my heart. Whatever we do, don't let's forget about peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colette. So welcome to everyone. A very special welcome to Bishop Nicholas Hudson, our area bishop, auxiliary bishop of Westminster, no stranger to Farm Street, and who oversees us in justice and peace in the diocese. But the main event this evening is to listen to Baroness Scotland, our speaker, for this inaugural Justice and Peace Westminster lecture. Patricia Janet Scotland was born on the 19th of August 1955 in Dominica, moved to the UK with her family, growing up in East London, trained as a lawyer, and became the first black woman to be appointed a Queen's Counsel in 1991. At 35, she was also the youngest woman ever to be made a QC. The first black woman to be appointed Deputy High Court Judge, Recorder, and Master of Middle Temple. Joined the House of Lords in 1997 as Baroness Scotland of Astal, going on to serve as a minister in the Foreign Office, Home Office, and Lord Chancellor's Department. Baroness Scotland undertook major reform through those departments of the criminal justice system, including the introduction of the Domestic Violence, Crime and Victims Act. She was appointed Attorney General in 2007, the first woman to hold the post since it was created in 1315. She founded the Eliminate Domestic Violence Global Foundation in 2011, was appointed Prime Ministerial Trade Envoy to South Africa in 2012, elected as the Alderman of Bishopsgate in the City of London in 2014. Other officers include Chancellor of the University of Greenwich, Patron of the Corporate Alliance Against Domestic Violence, Patron of Lifeline, Trinidad and Tobago, and the Caribbean Science Foundation. Baroness Scotland has been Commonwealth Secretary General since 2016. And it's a very great pleasure to invite her this evening to address us in this lecture on delivering peace in a multipolar world.
Well, good evening, everyone. As you can imagine, as a Catholic woman, this is a very unusual position for me to stand. And it really is a great moment. And it's an honor and a privilege to be able to speak to you tonight. As many of you will know, I stand here occupying a number of hats, because peace has been part of my life and my profession since I was 21, which you all understand was yesterday. And the roles that I have played have been significant in many ways, but the most important role that I have had for as long as I can remember is being a Catholic. A Catholic first, a Catholic second, and a Catholic last. So that every role has been imbued by a deep commitment to our faith. And therefore, my primary role is actually as a parishioner in this church. And it's a slightly surreal experience for me because I normally sit at the back of the church on the last row. And I come here to obtain peace and succor and to have my soul refreshed so that I am able to do what I have always tried to do, and which all of us as people of faith try to do, and that is to save God. And this is a very special church, a very special place, because it's imbued with the peace of God. It is somewhere you come to have your soul refreshed, your spirits lifted, and an opportunity to keep your eye on the beacon that will take you home. So it's an extraordinary moment for me, not to be at the back of the church, but to be here at the front, talking about my day job. And it's also a very special day because I had been invited to be one of the members of a committee for the Zayed Award for Human Fraternity. It's an independent and international award recognizing individuals or entities across the world who lead by example, collaborating and bridging the divide and creating real human connection. But what's really significant is this award for humanity fraternity was established on February the 4th, 2019, to mark the historic meeting in Abu Dhabi between His Eminence, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Professor Ahmad Al-Taheb, and His Holiness, Pope Francis, during which they co-signed the document on human fraternity for world peace and living together. And God moves in mysterious ways, because today was the first meeting of that judging committee. And it's interesting, because I think I will just read the names of the committee, because this is the committee which seeks for peace. There's His Excellency Macky Sall, the former president of Senegal, His Excellency José Luis Rodriguez Zapatero, who, as you know, was the former Prime Minister of Spain, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is the Director General of the World Trade Organization. There's His Eminence, Cardinal Peter Turkson, Judge Ahmad Abdel Salam, and then there's me. And our role is to identify and seek out for 2025 the award to be given to the person or institution or body who has done the most to bring peace. And it's a role which I have felt humbled by, because when the great Imam and our beloved Pope came together, it was an historic moment. It was an act of peace between two great faiths at a time of great turbulence. And we are living in a time of great turbulence. And so as we come together tonight, it is a privilege to be able to talk in this very special place, a place dedicated to faith and community, about the needs of the world and our need for justice and our need for peace. And I stand with you as your Secretary General of the Commonwealth, because the United Kingdom is a founding member of that beloved family. 56 countries, 2.7 billion people, 60% of whom are under the age of 30. And it's a family of nations which covers every race, every creed, every culture, every economic position. We have rich ones, poor ones, Squeezed middle, landlocked, island state, large countries, small. The largest, India, 1.4 billion. One of our smallest, Nauru, Kiribati, 10 or 11,000. But I am genuinely moved by this opportunity to come together as a community to talk to you about what we as individuals can do, because each and every one of us, without exception, has to be a champion for justice and a champion for peace. Because peace in our world has never been more needed than it is today. And we are living in a very difficult space. And together, we have to explore how we navigate our complex, multipolar world in pursuit of that peace, in pursuit of unity, and in pursuit of justice, because we live in extraordinary times. The very concept of a multipolar world signals an age where power and influence are dispersed across many nations, each with its own history, values, and aspirations. And this diversity brings richness. It also brings challenges, challenges the like of which we have never seen. And those challenges are more interlinked, more dynamic, and impactful than ever. They present themselves in a tangled knot of economic, environmental, and security crises spanning global systems, crises which combine and accelerate one another, placing enormous pressure on our democratic systems and bringing forward the tipping point of conflict. The world is less peaceful now than it has been for a generation. There are 57 active conflicts right now, more than at any time since the Second World War. And as many as 92 countries are drawn into the fighting. A dangerous moment for our world. We are in a war with each other and with nature. And it's also a tragedy. And it can feel at times quite overwhelming when geopolitical tensions rise, economic disparities widen, and the painful effects of conflict, extremism, and prejudice abound. Indeed, the very idea of truth is now a matter of dispute. Truth's gateway, information and facts can be contested and easily manipulated. New forms of communication through social media, a means of connecting us more closely than ever, and yet it's the source of enormous opportunity. But it has been harnessed to sow seeds of division and discord, too often driving us apart. And overarching all of this is the climate crisis, the greatest threat to our common home. The ever-present reminder of our shared vulnerability and the ultimate threat multiplier. It knows no borders, yet it is the smallest, poorest, and most vulnerable who suffer the most. Many of these nations are part of our Commonwealth family, and I've seen their pain throughout my time in this office, and I share their conviction that climate action is not only a political necessity, but a moral responsibility which each of us carries, and a prerequisite for peace. To advance this responsibility and build a genuinely durable future in which we live in harmony with the natural world and with each other, the world requires a quality of political, economic, and technical cooperation which has not been seen in our lifetimes. And we need that cooperation at a moment when the multilateral system beyond the Commonwealth is more fractured than any of us can remember. So these challenges are unprecedented, but it is precisely because of their scale and their gravity that we must stand up, that we must persist. As Pope John XIII reminded us in Pacem in Terris, peace on earth can never be established, never guaranteed, except by diligent observance of the divinely established order. And we are called not to be discouraged, but to act, grounded in truth and motivated by a profound love of all humanity. And when we consider the question before us this evening, we are blessed to be able to draw on the wisdom of our shared history and from the teachings of the Church. Because more than ever, the world needs voices which speak of unity, compassion, and justice, and people who are prepared to walk the path of faith, courage, and hope. And we can be those people. It must be us. The experience of the Commonwealth in the last 8 years has been instructive. Our Association of Nations was forged in the fires of colonialism, but it emerged as a force for peace and partnership. United today by a unique combination of principles and practical action, the reality of the modern Commonwealth is remarkable and hopeful. From an asymmetric history, 56 nations, representing a third of humanity, now stand as equals. We have difficult conversations in a constructive spirit. We concentrate on what joins us as opposed to what divides us. And we face the world's challenges together. This has been the hallmark of the modern Commonwealth. And you can see it in our collective refusal to turn a blind eye to apartheid. You can see it in the groundbreaking Lusaka Declaration on Racism in 1979. You can see it in the Langkawi Declaration on the Environment in 1989, which paved the way to the first Earth Summit. So that's 3 years before Rio. And you can see it in the Commonwealth Charter, which created the framework for the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see it in our continuous, tireless fight for the small, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. The great Nelson Mandela said, the Commonwealth makes the world safe for diversity. Indeed, the modern Commonwealth is an enigma of diversity and equality. So many people can't understand us. They don't know how we survive. They don't understand how so much difference can merge into so much unity. But if it wasn't for this, if it didn't so confound its own history, and if it were not brave enough to look evil straight in the face and call it what it is, then it would not survive. And indeed, I certainly would not be Secretary General. My experience as Secretary General has reinforced this history. 27 times during my tenure, I have been called on by heads of government from the Commonwealth, countries in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, to engage, to support, to mediate, and to ease escalating tensions. And 27 times, quietly, but successfully, in a spirit of mutual understanding and respect for our common humanity, we have steered the course away from conflict and towards peace. And we have just returned from our latest heads of government meeting in Samoa, my last as Secretary General. So if I look a little tired and I sound a little croaky, all I can tell you is you try leaving Samoa and arriving in UK 4 days later and see if you're still compos mentis. The experience in Samoa was extraordinary. Some are saying it's the best Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting to date. And it was an exercise in God's peace in action. Samoa, as many of you know, is a small island state in the Pacific. It has 200,000 people, situated in the vastness of the Pacific and steeping in spirituality, bringing respectful dialogue, resolution, and progress to issues which have long been troublesome. And it was quite an extraordinary thing because every single Samoan participated in the Chogan. Every village had a country. And you had presidents and prime ministers arguing about which village was the best, because their village was the best. I have to tell you, they were all wrong. My village was the best. And we walked together for peaceful understanding day by day and built it brick by brick. But it was interesting because I listened to some of the media rhetoric and I understood it had no correlation whatsoever with what we were doing in Samoa. And to their utter surprise, we in the Commonwealth agreed on everything. And I reflect today on the way in which it highlights the ongoing relevance and importance of the Commonwealth experience, which brings life to the rich history of the Church's teaching, from Augustine to Aquinas and beyond. That peace is not merely an absence of conflict, but the presence of justice, equity, and respect for human dignity. That we are called to create peace by building communities rooted in love and justice. And that this calling is both our inheritance and our mandate. I've been reminded of a powerful truth in this job, that whilst the world feels as though it is spinning ever faster, We do not need to create a new blueprint for peace. We do not need to reinvent the wheel or redraw the map. Our experience, our faith, and the church shows us the way. Our core belief that every person is created in the image of God, worthy of dignity and compassion, is a sacred principle. It demands that we see each other, each man, each woman, each child, as precious. It strengthens the conviction that peace must be rooted in the common good, that we are one human family, and peace can only be achieved together. Solidarity is not just a word. It is a powerful force for change. When we commit to solidarity, we recognize our lives are interconnected. No matter who we are, rich or poor, black or white, young or old, our struggles shared and our dreams woven together. And in all circumstances, we must prioritize the needs of the poor, the marginalized, the overlooked, because it is they who suffer most in times of conflict. Uplifting the less fortunate is not only an act of charity, but of justice, which is at the heart of true peace. Most of all, the long view of the church reminds us that peace is not simply a destination, but a lifelong journey. And ongoing peace, nurtured in our daily lives and relationships. And it's real, and it's deliverable, and it's possible if we craft it, if we commit to it, if we hunger for it, we will be sated. And this is the essence of what Pope Francis calls a culture of encounter. In a culture of encounter, we bridge our differences through understanding, forgiveness, and love. It is a call for us all to be builders of bridges, not walls, inspired by our faith, and the faith which sustains us and enables us to see where the path to peace resides and to follow it through all the twists and turns. The faith which guides us through the dark and the still places, even where you think there is no light and no way forward, helping you to step out into the void, because you know that He is the way, the truth, and the life. The faith that persuades you to hold on to the hem of His garment, no matter how hopeless and tired you are, or you think it is, or how you feel, because you know He will make the right choices. The faith which reassures you, even when you think it seems bad, that it is good, because He has made it so. We always see through the glass darkly. He never does, because He always knows where He is going, and it always is to a better place. And I keep thinking about the many occasions when I've seen God's hand, when I know that it is He and He alone who could have made the peace. And I was thinking as I came in about the cotton tree in Freetown in Sierra Leone. It's a towering natural structure, a tree which is more than 400 years old. It was a haven and a focal point for the first freed slaves to return to Freetown at the end of the 18th century. And it has stood as a symbol of peace and justice for all of Sierra Leone. And it became a symbol of liberty for settlers and a living monument of the struggles and triumphs throughout the generations, a reminder of origin, resilience, and ongoing pursuit of freedom, equality, and justice. And last year, the political situation was difficult. Tensions were high, and I was in Freetown with my team trying to bring the parties together when an almighty storm ripped through the capital and felled the tree. Lightning struck it, and it split down the middle, and it was destroyed. And the whole country trembled, because that tree was seen as the symbol of justice and peace. And the participants said this was God striking at the heart of Sierra Leone, and there would now be war. The sides would never come together. And it was a metaphor for the breakdown of unity and the total loss of hope. And I sat with the president whilst the storm raged. But such was the importance of the tree's symbolism that the opposite happened. And I'll tell you how. Because my team, all of us of different faiths, but 3 of us Catholic, all prayed. And my Assistant Secretary General went to Mass very early at 6 a.m. And the priest had a branch from the tree. And they were talking about the importance of peace. And my Assistant Secretary General brought that branch to us, and we totally recast the meaning. Because what we said is this wasn't a sign of destruction. This was an opportunity of rebirth. That the old fears, the old disputes were struck down, and out of it could come something new, something fresh, and something which would bind. And that became the symbol that was used. And its demise brought all the different voices together, and it became the instrument which bound the fractured parties and brought them to peace, an instrument of God's peace. So what did we learn? That you have to look for his peace every day, in every situation. And if you look with his eyes and hear with his ears and feel with his heart, you will find him, and you will be able to make his peace. And the very next day, in what would have been the shadow of the fallen tree, the peace pledge between all the leaders was signed, and it holds to this day. And if you look at the photographs, you'll see the 2 leaders, hands together with mine, and the branch in between, binding and making the peace of God. And the principles and the practices of our faith in the pursuit of justice and peace are enduring. They are tried and they are tested, and they are more relevant and important than ever. But what does it mean to harness them in our multipolar world? It is not my job to talk about specific countries, and indeed I can't and I won't. And the only reason I mention Sierra Leone is because others have mentioned it before me. But indeed, as Secretary General of a leading international organization, it is actively unhelpful for me to do so, But the foundations of peace building are the same, irrespective of the specific context. The first, inclusive dialogue. In a world of many voices, let us listen with empathy and respond with humility. As individuals, as communities, as nations, we are called to speak together. People now refer to it as dialogue that respects diversity and seeks understanding even amid profound differences. Justice and equity. We must pursue policies and initiatives that lift the marginalized and address systemic inequalities. And peace cannot thrive where there is oppression, poverty, and injustice. And justice, guided by compassion, is essential to sustainable peace. And the stewardship of care for creation. As caretakers of God's creation, we are responsible for its protection. This commitment is urgent, for climate change knows no borders, and as Pope Francis reminds us, we are all bound by a common home and must care for it together. It's said that we are the first generation to suffer the aberrant consequences of climate change, but tragically, we are the last to be able to do anything about it. So building and strengthening these foundations are not only the work of governments and international organizations, it's the work of communities, of individuals, of each and every one of us. We are each stewards of this world. And so, as a former cabinet minister, as a head of an international organization, as a fully paid up member of the human race, I can guarantee that from experience. And we can start by building partnerships across lines of faith, across nations, across communities, the kind of partnerships we continue to build through our faith in the Commonwealth programs. We can invest in education that teaches our young people empathy, respect, and a sense of responsibility for the world around them. And we can remember that above all, peace begins in our daily lives with a single act of kindness, a moment of understanding, a willingness to see the world through another's eyes. These are the building blocks of peace, and we are all capable of it. Mother Teresa said that peace begins with a smile, but it's something I was taught by my mother too. She said, a smile costs you nothing, but it may be the only smile that person sees today. It may be the difference between them thinking life is worth it and then believing it isn't. And I have no doubt that such a simple, beautiful concept will resonate with each of you. But having sat in deadlocked negotiations between parties on the brink of conflict, I promise you that it is as true in diplomacy and politics as it is in our daily lives. In such a complex world, more connected and yet more fragmented than ever, with more danger and more opportunity, full of pain and full of love, it is as if we stand at the crossroads of history, at an inflection point. To build a world which is truly in God's image and worthy of his name, we must actively choose and walk the path of hope. We must continue to believe that peace is possible, that justice is within reach, and that love is the most powerful force we possess. It falls to us to be the peacemakers in our families, in our communities, throughout our societies, and in our world. All I can tell you is that in my experience my whole life, I have seen God do things that others have said were impossible. And I have learned that nothing is impossible for God. And he has forged us to be his instruments. And so I hope that you allow me to share my mother's prayer, because this is one that she'd say to me every time I went on a journey, and I feel I've been on a very, very long journey. She'd say, "May God bless and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you, and be merciful unto you all the days of your life. May your guardian angel walk beside you, and may Jesus keep you safe in the very palm of his hand. And may he grant us courage to be the instruments of his peace in our world." We can do this if we choose. And I'm so glad that those of us who've come to church today have all chosen. And I thank you for that. I thank you for being willing to be his hands, his heart, his eyes, his ears in a world that's never needed him more. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Baroness Scotland. You've given us so much to go away with, back to parishes, to the agencies, many people here representing agencies working for justice and peace. Wherever we are, you've given us so much to think about, to pray about, and to act on. We have time for a few questions now to Baroness Scotland, so I think we've got a roving mic, thanks Santana, going around. Perhaps if you could please just introduce yourself just by saying your name and if you belong to a particular parish or you represent a particular agency or where you're from. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, hi, it's Kieran Stewart here from CAFOD. So, in terms of international debt and the mess it's making of people's lives in the global south, and the fact that 90% of the debt is subject to English law, is there a possibility of reforming that? Because 75% of aid is given in loans rather than grants. Is that an opportunity to change the law and even things up a bit in that respect so that Britain can really be a force for good in the world and show global leadership?
Can't tell you how extraordinary it is to speak from here. Absolutely. One of the things that we've been working on for the last 8 years is the impact of debt. If you look at what's happening in our world today, particularly in relation to climate change, many of our poorer countries are either drowning as a result of sea level rise or drowning in debt. The Commonwealth has created, during my tenure, something which is called Mediation, where we are helping our members to manage both public and private debt. We've got about $4.5 trillion under management at the moment. And what we see is great injustice and unfairness, because those who are least able to pay are paying at the highest rate. If you look at many of the countries who are most indebted, a lot of that debt is as a result of climate disasters which they did not create. So we have been fighting very hard to do a number of things. The first is to create a universal vulnerability index, so that it is not just GDP, but it is an understanding of the level of vulnerability, particularly for the small states. And we are seeking for a radical change in the way in which the international financial institutions operate the debt portfolio, and we are arguing strongly for radical change. And that is something which is starting to gain purchase. When I started in 2016, there were those who said there was no correlation between the climate crisis and the level of indebtedness. Now, we have looked at the empirical data, and it's clear that that's just not true. And we are, through the Bridgetown Initiative and others, really pushing for a change. And the World Bank and the the International Monetary Fund, are now starting to move. But it is a real fight. And we have to make a difference. And this is really what climate justice is about. Because if our members, if our small and vulnerable states have to mitigate and adapt, they're going to need the money. And they haven't got it at the moment. And we are also fighting. We've created something called the Climate Finance Access Hub. And with just $8.2 million, we've already been able to deliver $365 million into the hands of our member states. And we've got another $500 million in the pipeline. But we need to do so much more. And I will go to COP in 2 weeks' time in Baku, in Azerbaijan, and we're going to fight. And we're going to fight for change, because that's what's fair, and that's what's just. And that's the way we're going to get some peace.
Thank you, Baroness. My name is Hugh. I'm a student at the LSE. You'd spoken about this work you'd done mediating various conflicts. I was wondering, in that experience, what had you personally learned finding conciliation in those events?
I think one of the things that I've learned is that you have to not just listen to people's words, you have to listen to what they mean. Because quite often you hear the anger and the rhetoric, but you have to really identify where the pain is and speak to that, as opposed to sometimes the anger that coats it. And I have found that it's so easy for all of us to concentrate on the things which divide us. It's so clear what divides us. And it's a bit like thinking about your DNA. Our DNA, 99.9% of our DNA is identical, but we concentrate on the 0.1%, which divides us, which makes us black, white, blonde, blue-eyed, or brown, or tall, short. And so in the Commonwealth, what we tend to do is firstly identify the things which we think we are never going to agree about and put that to one side. And then we look at the 99.9% of the things we can agree on, and we deal with that first. And by the time you have dealt with that, what you find is the 0.1%, which you thought would never be capable of being solved, it gets pretty boring when you agree with everything. And then the 1% of other no longer seems frightening and impossible. You are able to see it in proportion, and about 50% of that you thought you could never agree on, you do agree, and the other 50%, you agree to disagree well. And disagreeing well is really important. And I have found that if you can bring people together to concentrate on what joins them first, it usually makes it possible for you to resolve the things that appeared impossible. I think it was Nelson Mandela who said, the impossible always looks impossible until it's done. And I have to tell you, I've spent my whole life with people saying that everything I do is impossible. Maybe I'm impossible. But we get it done.
Good evening, Secretary General. Josh, I've just graduated from St Andrews and moved from Glasgow to join the Home Office. You've got substantial experience managing disagreement in the Commonwealth, whether that be over the institutions of monarchy or maybe economic alignment, some countries looking more to the east rather than towards the west. What are some practical tips that you have for negotiating? What mindset do you take with you into the actual negotiating room?
When I negotiate anything, I always want to listen. Because I think if you are going to come to some sort of mediated settlement, you have to be able to walk in the other person's shoes, look through their eyes and see it from their point of view. Because if you don't do that, you won't be able to understand why their position is as it is. And quite often, what you find is that people don't want to listen to each other, and they definitely don't want to hear each other. So I think the most important thing is to help them to look beyond their own narrow position and to identify where the pathway to agreement may be. And I've always found that there is one. But I have to tell you that to find it, usually, I have to follow my mother's advice, which is you have to work really hard and pray. And when you can't work anymore, you just have to pray harder.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I'm Neka. I'm a parishioner at St John's Wood in Marylebone. I've been working in the city for 14 years, and I actually saw you speak about 10 years ago. And this is a bit more of a personal question, but one of the things that I noticed is you have a very eloquent way of bringing in your faith in your work. And working in the city, and I'm sure in other environments where it feels increasingly hostile to talk about faith in the workplace, I thought it would just be interesting to understand how you developed your voice and how you use it effectively in terms of driving change.
Well, I think it's because I've never hidden who I am. And I have everything I've done, everything I've achieved, everything I am is by the grace of God. So I cannot fail to acknowledge him. And it gets very uncomfortable because people are always saying, you know, you've done this and this and this. And I have to say, look, do not get this twisted. Do not get this twisted. That's not me. That is not me. The person who has done that is him, through me. And at every stage of my career, I have to tell you that I was told I should not do God. So when I was at the bar, and I was in a profession which was in 1977 when I joined. I told you I was only 25, didn't I? It was 97% white Anglo-Saxon male, 3% female, and 0.001% were black female. And I was told that everything I was meant that I couldn't succeed. Okay, so I was, and you may not have noticed this, but I'm not white. And I know it might be very difficult for some of you, but I'm also female. And I was the wrong political complexion, and also I didn't even have the decency to be Anglican or a Protestant. I was Catholic. So I was nothing I should be. And when I was told that you shouldn't do God, I said, well, I sort of do, and it's the only way I've survived. And I went into the Commonwealth. I was also told at one stage, and this is not for record, it's all Chatham House rules here, that we didn't do God either. So I said, we do now. So I think you have to be you. And when you go into something, you have to take your whole self with you. So if you are not ashamed of him, he won't be ashamed of you. And I remember literally people in my chambers laughing because I tended to win my cases. And when I came back, I remember them saying, oh, she's won again. And then one of my friends said, yeah, but we know Patricia doesn't win her cases. God does. To which I said, I'm glad you've noticed. So I think, do not be apologetic, just be you. You don't proselytize, but you don't hide who you are either. I mean, if I always will say, God bless you on my, and I mean it. It's not just a term of art, it's what I mean. And I have shared my mother's prayer everywhere I've been. And I've been amazed what a hunger there is for that. Because if we are followers of Christ, we should demonstrate his love. And love is the most powerful, attractive thing there is. And if you love people, then they see him. And you don't have to talk about it, you can be it. And I remember someone once saying, and it was one of the greatest compliments, they said I was like sunshine. And they wanted to know what made me so happy all the time. And actually, what made me happy when people wanted to crush me and were absolutely abysmal to me. And they said, well, how can she still be smiling? And the reason I smile is because I know he lives. And I know he reigns. And I know that whatever they do to me will never touch me unless and until he wills it. And if he wills it, it's good for me. And the pain and the difficulty and the trauma is there, but you just have to go through it. And you have to be surrounded by families like mine. I remember once I was feeling really, really sorry for myself. I'd had a terrible time. People were being really disgusting. They were slating me and lying about me in the press, and I just thought life was hell. So I have one of my older sisters, who I think she thinks she's giving Mother Teresa a run for her money, actually. I phoned her to say that I'd having a bad time, and I was telling her all the terrible things that had happened, and there was silence from her. Then she said to me, are you finished? And I said, well, yes, I suppose I am. Are you sure? Anything else you'd like to say? I said, well, I think it's been quite hard, really. And she said, now listen to me. until you have been dragged through the streets, whipped on your back, with a crown of thorns on your head, and then nailed to a cross, you, my sister, have a way to go. I went, oh, okay, well, I was just saying I wasn't having a very good day. So I think living, God never said our lives would be easy. He just said he'd be with us every step of the way. And I have found that any time things are impossible, that's when he's the best. And I can think of so many times when I have had this conversation with him, where I remember once it was, we were supposed to have a meeting. Everyone said it was a disaster, never going to happen, and I had no chair for this meeting. And everyone told me this was be humiliation, and it was 20 past midnight on the day of the meeting, and I had no chairman, and I was told no one was going to turn up. So I said to the Lord, okay, Lord, it's no problem. If you want me to crash and burn, I'm ready. Crashing and burning, maybe what you want, okay, I'm up for it. But if you do not want me to crash and burn, I think you need to find me a chair and people don't turn up. But, crash and burn, if that's what you're on, I'm on. I'm crashing and I'm burning. And then something came into my head which said, phone the president of a country. So I thought, it's 20 past midnight. Are you joking me? Okay, I'm going to text. Text goes in, 20 past midnight, the meeting's supposed to be 11. So I say, dear Mr. President, just wondered whether you'd like to chair this meeting tomorrow morning at 11. If you could possibly do it, I could send you the papers. And at 2 a.m. in the morning, a message came back from the president saying, my dear sister, I would be delighted. I went, hallelujah! And as opposed to no one turning up, of the 56 countries, 49 countries came. That wasn't me. That was him. And so when things get really bad is when he says, move out the way and watch me work. And so there have been so many miracles. So I would say never, never be ashamed of him. He will never let you down. And if bad things happen, it's because they had to, and they're not really bad. And you will find that if something doesn't happen, it's because you weren't meant to do it then, and you will have missed a bullet. You will have missed a bullet. And just trust him. And don't be ashamed of him. And if they don't get you, that's their problem. And I feel so sorry for those who do not have God in their life, because I could not have achieved anything without him. And if things go wrong and I screw up, that's me. If things go well, that's him. So just give him the glory, and all will be well.
We have time, I think, for just another couple of questions. So I think we've got two ladies here with their hands up.
First of all, I have to say, I hail you for being a woman, a black one, of course, but also for being upfront with your work, right? You're not frightened. You know why? Because, throughout this talk of peace and justice, for me, I think you have known who Jesus Christ is to you. This is the criteria of your work, peace and justice. Most people do not know who Jesus Christ is Catholics and non-Catholics. They don't know. They may profess with Jesus, but they do not know who really he is. But once you know who he is, you cannot be afraid. And therefore, well done.
And a final question, please.
Thank you very much. I applaud you. When you were talking, I thought about a song that we always sing in church. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. And it may not sound like a question I'm going to ask you about freedom, but I'm going to ask you it anyway. I am a neuroscientist. I deal mostly with older people, with Alzheimer's, other areas as well, but that's my main interest. And I do find people of colour, even when, well, my mother's from Grenada, okay? Even when they are actually very ill and they're on the late stages, they still remember Jesus Christ and they still remember the actual rubric as well. And I remember wheeling my mum to church, okay? I'm going to get emotional because she's only recently passed. But she could always do this, no matter what. And it is, I think, a story of freedom. It's a sad story, but it's a story of freedom as well, because she still had the freedom to practice her religion. And I wondered, in your vast experience and in your, wealth of meeting different types of people all over the globe, have you found that sometimes religion is the last thing to go, even when everyone else is giving up hope? I'm going to get upset. I'm going to give you the mic, but thank you very much.
I think certainly it's been my experience within my family. I was very blessed because my mother and my grandmother, and I think the women were real prayer warriors. And so that even when my mother had had a stroke and she couldn't talk, she could still listen to Mass on the television every day, she could still pray. And we knew that that was what was sustaining her throughout the whole time. So I have seen through my whole life, faith in action. And actually I come from an ecumenical family because my father was a devout Methodist and my mother was a devout Catholic. And those of us in this church know what a challenging marriage that was, which didn't last very long, only almost 70 years. And they really demonstrated to me the importance of being God-centered, because they said that faith for them was centered in him, and the differences were not that great. And they were married. I can tell you how unusual my parents were. I understand that when they married in 1937, because my mother said the Angelus 4 times a day and my father was a devout Methodist, he would not convert to Catholicism. And my mother would not agree to marry him unless she had a full nuptial mass, a bit of an impediment. And they went to the priest, and he said, well, that was very difficult, but he'd have to ask the Monsignor. And then they spoke to the Monsignor, and he said, that's really very difficult. I think we need to go to the bishop. And they then went to the bishop, who said he thought it was incredibly complex, and therefore they needed to go to the archbishop. And the archbishop felt very challenged, and he said maybe they needed to go to the cardinal in Rome. And then when we went to the cardinal, the cardinal then said he really thought this was a matter for His Holiness. And my parents apparently had the first papal dispensation for a Methodist to marry a Catholic in the cathedral in Dominica without either of them having to convert, provided all their children were Catholic. And unfortunately, they only had 12. So I think my mother got her own back. So I think it is the thing that tends to in my experience, last right till the end. Certainly for both my parents, it was very omnipresent, their faith. And that was actually a real confirmation of all of our faith, to see faith in action, even in the most extreme places. But I think one of the things I've learned is that all things are possible. And if I look back on my life, I really shouldn't be here. I'm one of my parents' 12 only children, because my mother and father said they only had one of each of us. I was born in a small island in the Caribbean, grew up here. I went in the East End of London. No one, I mean, if anyone had put a bet on me, they would be a billionaire by now, because who I became and what I've done should all have been impossible. And I think what God has the opportunity to do is to pick up a pebble that looks useless and awful and nobody wants, and he'll take it and he'll polish it and he'll shine it, and he'll say to other people, do you want this? And I'll say no. You sure you don't want it? No. And then when he's finished, he creates a diamond. And that's what he can do for all of us. And if we trust him, that's what he will do for our world. So although I've spoken about this being one of the darkest times, I know that just one tiny pinprick of light, which is God's love, can illuminate that darkness and consume it all. And that's why I am not fearful, I am hopeful. And someone said to me, are you pessimistic about what we will do in this world? And I said, no, I'm just determined. So I think each of us need to be determined to do his work, determined to follow him, and determined never to give up. And I know that each of us wants to say to the Lord our God, Lord, in your mercy, hear my prayer. Help me to be as you would like me to be, as opposed to how I am, and help me to have the courage and spirit to do your work. And through your grace, all things are possible. And in my life, I have seen all things are possible because he lives.
On behalf of all of us here this evening, thank you so much, sincerely, Baroness Scotland, for giving us such a powerful, inspirational, personal testimony following such a thoroughly and carefully prepared lecture on the topic of this evening. The second part of this evening, the Q&A, really should have been not called Q&A, but a wonderful personal testimony to living out your faith with such great hope in public life in a complex, indeed multipolar world in which we live. So thank you so much for giving us that this evening. It really is very much appreciated. But I know that having listened to what you've been saying this evening and the thread running through it, as soon as I say thank you, I know that you will be saying thanks be to God. Having said that, I do want to say thanks to various people this evening to have made this event possible. To thank Colette Joyce and our team from Justice and Peace Westminster, and our team also in the parish here, those both in front of house this evening and those behind the scenes. That's George McComb, our parish secretary in our office, Jen Copestake operating our online broadcast service, Mark Smith and the Cana Lounge Cafe team, who have provided the refreshments this evening. The Cana Lounge Cafe is open Tuesday to Thursday in the basement of the Mount Street building here. Just recommended donations, and we work with various people who are looking for volunteer opportunities as well, which will help in their lives. And it's a little community forming Tuesday to Thursday, 10:30 to 2 o'clock. Do call in if you have the time and you're in the area. But that really is a segue to say that we are now all invited to refreshments in the Arupe Hall. Some people ask, why is it called Arupe Hall? Why isn't it called the Parish Hall? Well, the Venerable Pedro Arupe, the servant of God, as he's called in the Catholic Church, on the path to sainthood, was the Father General, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus of the Jesuits in the 1970s, and he was very much behind our moving to a preferential option for the poor, for example, founding the Jesuit Refugee Service. So he's a very important example to us for what we do. We start a novena to him, in fact, next Tuesday, praying for his beatification and his canonization as saint one day. Please do come into the Arupe Hall for refreshments. If you don't know where exactly you're going, please just do follow the crowd, and donations are in baskets there to cover the cost of the refreshments this evening. I won't stand in the way of our doing that now, so we can all share a little bit more with Baroness Scotland and with each other, particularly perhaps of what we do, of which parishes we're from, and how we're part of the Justice and Peace Network, part of the Catholic family and the family here. Thank you again, once again, for coming this evening, and thank you especially to Baroness Scotland for giving us such an inspirational testimony.